Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, as far as, you know, because we've been discussing this for a while, and the general consensus is that it's damn near going to be impossible to accurately reconstruct the Egyptian for several reasons, especially since there's a lot of loans and there's different language groups that resided in there. Plus, of course, again, no vowels. In that we're basically, if we're going to go the reconstruction route, is basically that we're not going to have to go necessarily through accuracy, but through convention. Meaning that, you know, if we get a set group of languages to compare and reconstruct, especially more so because we're actually more so looking for the vowels. That, you know, for every word, it's just we just do the general convention. So whatever is the dominant, you know, first vowel, you know, saying in the word or whatnot, that's just what we choose, because there's not going to be an accurate way without the recorded vowels to reconstruct, you know, saying in that manner. So we're going to have to do kind of like what the Hebrews, or not necessarily the Hebrews, but the Jews,
Israeli,
their reconstruction or their revitalization of the language. And so, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Well, I was going to say that was something that Dr. Raketi Amin, in her presentation, she actually spoke at length on the Israeli example, Ben Yehuda, and some of the things that were done there. You know, just looking at the convention, one thing, and I think that this has been something that's, you know, so vowel reconstructions have been done, and, you know, also looking at the phonetic inventory. So like, for example, if you have rounding, and this is actually what I was looking at the features. So even in the first idea of looking at these 17 or so macro African language groups, that if you look at basically what are the features, there are a few issues that I've been considering. One is that, all right, if you're starting off with something like a Rosetta Stone, then we have to deal with to what degree can a Greek person pronounce African sounds? You know, and I'm thinking about that even in the contemporary context. If you have, I don't know, an English person, a French person, and then you give them a Yoruba word like agbalagba, then they may have some very difficult times with that. What tends to happen, we even see this in Cuba, right? So these are people who are, you know, descendants of Yoruba, or at least influenced by African people who are influenced by heavy Yoruba last wave of enslaved Africans who are brought in there. So anytime there's a gbe or a kwe in a word, they replace it, like alegba, they'll say alegwa, right? Or alakba, alapwa, right? So anything like that. So this is just what happens is that people will replace unfamiliar sounds with sounds that are familiar, in that case in Spanish. And this is what I would also anticipate to have been the case, where, you know, if you're looking at starting off with something like a Rosetta Stone, what you would have is an approximation of, okay, Ptolemaeus or Cleopatra or whatever. Now, basically what they would do would be mapping sounds. And I'm saying all that to say, I think that one thing, even if it's conventional or reconstruction or whatever, would be looking at a featural approach, a phonetic featural approach. So for example, if you have pe, you know, for that original inventory, or be in that original inventory, basically, instead of dealing with those as phonemes or allophones, just look at what are the features. So this is voiceless, stop, voiceless labial stop. Here's voice labial stop. Now, if we're going to try to map this to these major African language groupings, what we would do instead of trying to perhaps impose pay, because Yoruba, for example, doesn't have a pay sound, it has a we sound, but there's absolutely no pay sound. So as opposed to trying to do that, trying to find, okay, what in this phonetic inventory available in this contemporary modern African language has those types of features of voiceless and labial, and then do basically a mapping from one to the other. What in this particular language is a voiced labial, and then doing that mapping. I think that that would be a way that one would actually make the convention or whatever is proposed pronounceable by those people. So if you have people who don't even have a sound, they can't pronounce a sound or whatever. And, I think that that's something that we can consider as well.
So when you propose these 17 macro groups, are you trying to put, for example, Middle Egyptian into one of those groups, or are you just trying to?
This is entirely synchronic. So this is something that was proposed by Professor Kwesi Pratt, where he and his team, he's out of South Africa at CASAS. And what they essentially did is look entirely at synchronic languages, existing languages right now. And based on factors, the main one is mutual intelligibility, because if you look at how, these white folks have broken up language families into this is that, Naja Congo A, Congo B, so forth and so on, that basically, even though you may have languages or two different names for this and this, that when it comes down to it, both of those may be mutually intelligible languages. And I can think, for example, the Gur language group up in northern Ghana. So you have Dagare, you have Dagomba, you have all these different languages, and each one has its own name. But if one person speaks, the other one can understand it. So with that, we'll look at this macro family and say, well, all of these languages where everybody understands each other, even though they have different names, we will group those together. So basically looking at all of these types of configurations in order to say, all right, these are the languages that exist now. And then basically trying to do a mapping of phonetic features and or phonological features, depending on the case.
Okay.
Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
Right. Right. So, that was one idea just in terms by way of a proposal. And, the point one would be convention. And I think at some point in time, it'll come down to that, because if we're going to make this practical and functional and something that we're going to move with this, then, we can't wait for 1,000 years and say, all right, finally it's perfect. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of possibilities in terms of vowel reconstruction when we're looking at contemporary African languages. So if we see in all of these different languages that the sound has changed regularly to this, then that may give us a sense that, okay, whatever this vowel is, most likely it was a rounded vowel, right? So maybe it was O, maybe it was all, maybe it was oo, right? And then we would also look at things like vowel height. That maybe, it's a high back vowel, okay, it's oo, and we're seeing that all across the board. So, Akili, try. What? Yeah. So, so I think that, even if it is convention, that I wouldn't say it would be entirely arbitrary, which would be like the way things work now, just insert the letter E anytime we don't know. That's how we do, like, all right, this is Kemet and Medu and whatever. But more so, all right, what's going on in the actual languages, looking at the features of those vowels, and then also looking at the surrounding consonants, right? So if you have a W and then a W, most likely the vowel in between is going to be a rounded vowel, right? If you have, and then even the entire form, but specifically looking at the vowels, that there's going to be some type of interaction, just in terms of what's known to be attested in languages, specifically contemporary African languages, in terms of in the V1 position, right? There are certain things that typically aren't going to occur in a V1 type of position, and just basically trying to dig up that raw data and make our proposals based on actual evidence as opposed to something that's, entirely just arbitrary.
Yeah, we've discussed that as well. So, knowing that it's going to be convention, but not, as you would say, totally arbitrary. That is grounded in something systematic and scientific, and then just keep going from there. Yeah, I mean, that's just the general consensus in terms of an approach. One that'll be, grounded in something systematic. At the same time, is not promoting that this is actually how, because again, we're dealing with 3,000 years. So even if we did something accurate, it would only be accurate for a small amount of time in comparison.
Right.
So it would still be synchronic to a certain point. So yeah, I mean, I agree.
Now, what are your thoughts just in terms of using a method like the comparative method? I remember like years back, we were discussing comparative method, and every word has its own history. Like if we're going to do something systematic and scientific, like I would lean towards also trying to find or use the comparative method for this. And has your view on that or take on that changed over time, or what's your thought?
My views on the comparative method hasn't changed. I don't know if you actually understood my views on the comparative method. And because I don't think we had an issue on the comparative method. It was an issue on how to define the concept of laws. So I come from a more scientific background, and I understand that a lot of social sciences utilizes scientific jargon, but they don't necessarily translate the same. So, when you talk about a particular law, for example, in physics, it's a little different than what somebody would say is a sound law in linguistics, even though fundamentally we're talking about the description of rules and things of that nature. So it wasn't an issue of the comparative method in itself. It was more so when people tried to use, for example, reconstructions as if they exist. So we have a fundamental thing in science where when we're actually comparing anything, the only thing that matters is stuff that exists. We don't utilize concepts that don't exist and then try to make arguments from there. And so that's the fundamental issue, for example, with Christopher Ehret's 95 work, to where when you look at it, the only existing language in which he's comparing is the actual ancient Egyptian, but all the other ones are reconstructions. So you don't use reconstructions upon reconstructions to reconstruct another reconstruction, and then argue that this is enforced in point of an actual language. And so that's the fundamental issue that I have and still have with a lot of works, and why fundamentally Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan are unscientific groupings. And so I would have to get clarity on what you presume my issue with the comparative method was.
Okay, if I recall, and I can actually pull up the thread, but you were making arguments to the effect of, each word has its history, and you are referring to neo-grammarian hypothesis, things of that nature. And I can actually quote it once I pull it up. Let me see. So now when linguists, specifically those who come from a scientific background as well, are using a law, using the term sound laws, that this term is not talking about in the sense of physics, of this is something that cannot be contravened. Basically, we're looking at how sounds change in a regular and recurrent fashion. And I'm pulling up the thread right now, but it seems that that was actually what you were discussing. You were saying that each single word has its own history. So as opposed to, like, for example, if I look at something like in the Akan language, anytime you see the letter se, right? In Yoruba, it's going to be the letter te, and in all these various Bantu languages, it's going to be the letter te, right? So for example, if I have esan as the word three in Akan, in Yoruba, it's going to be eta as the word three. In different Bantu languages, it's going to be ta or tatu or something of that nature. So now what we can come to is, all right, what has happened, right? Is this coming from a stop to a fricative? Is it going from a fricative to a stop? You know, in both cases, you have something voiceless. So to basically look at a sound law, what we're doing is we're making an observation on what's going on. You know, how do languages tend to change? Would you have a stop going to a fricative? Now, if we take the point of view that, all right, well, every single word has its own history and something of that nature, then basically we just be wiping out that it's regular and recurrent. At any time we see this letter te in this language, we see a letter se in this language. And then beyond that, anytime we see the letter pe in this language, we see a letter fe in this language. That once we're observing this, then we'll come to something of, okay, I think there's something going on, a correspondence between these particular stops and these fricatives or affricates, as the case may be, right? So this is what we're talking about in terms of there's something systematic going on. It's not just this word looks like that word. And this is what I see a lot of people who actually haven't studied linguistics, that they're looking at this word, they're looking at that word, and then they're basically running with a story that may be believable, but it's not scientific at all. It's basically just trying to get look-alike words, but there's no way in doing these look-alike words to actually determine scientifically how can we weed it out? How can we disprove it? Now, if it's just a story, it can't be disproved because it's just, I have a story that sounds good. But if you're actually looking at how these things are systematic and they correspond across, then you can actually start to weed out things that are lookalikes and borrowings and just aerial diffusion versus things that are actually cognates.
Yeah, I understand that. And again, going back to the whole law thing, the fundamental difference between a law in linguistics and a law, for example, physics, is that with a law.
Are you a physicist? Do you study physics, for example?
I do study physics and I study science. And so,
okay. Have you studied linguistics formally?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
So,
okay, go ahead.
When you're talking about a law in linguistics, your act is kind of retro, and so you can only describe what has happened. It doesn't make predictive values on how the sounds will evolve in the future. Whereas when you use the term law in physics per se, you're saying that given these conditions, that this is how it's going to evolve or move in a particular between two inertial reference frames into the future. And so we can make predictions on how this is going to go forward. But in linguistics, you can only describe it retroly. And so it's not going to tell you how sounds are going to evolve in the future. You have maybe some probabilities into which directions, but it doesn't give an accurate prediction on how things are going to be, in the future. And so that's how I distinguish, saying it in that sense. And when I say, for example, that words have its own history, we also have to keep in mind that sound change isn't simultaneous. It's gradual within a dialect or whatnot. And this is something like who discusses this? Let me pull it's the text called Evolutionary Phonology. If you have that text, I'm trying to get her name. I got too many books on this ground. I'll find it later. But that's one of the things that she discusses, saying in her text, and some of the problems with some of the assumptions often made in linguistic analysis in terms of the regularity of sound change. So not saying that sound change is not regular, but there are some other nuances in there that are not as cut and dry as certain things would seem in certain introductory linguistic books, and things of that nature. So
I actually was able to find the post, and I can post it here. So you said, I'm familiar with both laws and others, especially the Neo-Grammarian hypothesis, which states that every word has its own history. This challenges the regularity of sound change and lexical diffusion, which assumes sound change affects all words at the same rate. There are several issues with this. So you're talking about Neo-Grammarian hypothesis, states that every word has its own history. So when we're talking about laws, basically, well, first let's deal with the Neo-Grammarian hypothesis. So this is saying that there are no exceptions to sound laws. So in your understanding of that, you were saying that every word has its own history. And that's not actually what Neo-Grammarian hypothesis is saying and what it's about. And then also you are using reconstructed forms, you know, with these stars, but then you're arguing against reconstructed forms and arguing, saying that every word has its own history. But again, when we're looking at the comparative method, we're looking at how the sound change is regular. So, you know, and this is the difference between, you know, perhaps somebody who may not be a linguist, but, you know, may kind of look into it somewhat, and someone who actually is a linguist, that what you're doing is you're looking at how the sounds change across. And there are things that wouldn't even look similar to you, but once you can understand that there are these phonetic categories and features, right, then that's where we would be able to see an example like something like so in Chi, and then to in Yoruba, something like sa and ta, that again across this whole thing, and then that will point you to, okay, you know what, I think I need to look at all these fricatives, and I think I need to look at all these stops. I think I need to look at all these bilabials. I think I need to look at, you know, all these labials. And then it's going across, so you're actually seeing how the sound is changing. And then that can even give you a sense of what would happen, you know, in the future. But it's just within the constraints of this is how a human tongue works, this is how a human mouth works. So it would be very difficult for a Kwe to, you know, just all of a sudden become a ha, right? It's something on the entire other side of the mouth. So even if the sound is going to change, most likely it's going to change gradually. Most likely it's going to change based on, you know, this feature is lost or this feature, you know, is gained, that there's something going on here. So when we're talking about something like a sound law or Grimm's law or whatever, it's not in the sense of, you know, the courtroom law or anything else, any other use of the term. It's talking about this is how sounds change as attested, as we've observed scientifically, you know, throughout all languages in the world that are known. We can see how these sounds have changed.
Again, it sounds like I wrote what I just said. It's an issue of the rate of change, and
not only the rate of change, but how change occurs. Not only the rate of change, but how can a change occur whatsoever?
With how sounds change in the description of those changes. That's what a sound law is in linguistics: description of the changes and the rules of surrounding the change. And so that has never been a problem. And so I don't see what the issue is. And so I'm pretty sure that whatever I wrote, I have a citation in terms of the discussion and what point I'm coming from. And so again, it's not I don't have an issue with reconstructing at all. You know, it's an issue of, you know, arguing whether the reconstructions themselves are actual real or actual. And that is, you know, we understand that this is a theory in the terms of the way that we the way that we, you know, scientifically come out with theories based upon a series of tested facts.
Okay, well, that's the main thing, you know, if you're cool with reconstructions and, you know, basic things of that nature, because my major concern was basically this idea of look at this word, and then I'm going to come up with a story, you know, to buttress it, as opposed to look at this sound, and now that points me towards how these sounds are changing, you know, within the language and what's causing that, because that's when we're actually dealing with science. If we're dealing with this word looks like that word, and then we just come up with a story that sounds good, basically with the idea that, oh, every word has its own history, so forget how things are changing regularly and systematically. I'm just gonna say this word comes from that word, or these two look alike. Because when we do that, there's no way to disprove it. It's just believe me because I've come up with a convincing story. I think as long as we're not doing that type of deal, then we won't have a problem. So I'm cool. And I just posted a link here in the chat. And real quick, where did you study linguistics? Or is it self-study mostly?
No, it's self-study, but so I come from the Christopher Eric lineage.
Okay.
As far as that is concerned, my teachers, for example, Dr. Karen Kleiman, for example, who wrote The Picture for Our Compass at the University of Houston. She studied under Eric at UCLA. Babingi Bilolo, Dr. Rhonda Gonzalez, also, but Bilolo, different out of Congo, but Gonzalez again. From the area. And so
now you studied at a university, or you like studied under them like one-on-one, or?
At the University of Houston and one-on-one with
Okay. Okay, that's cool. Okay, good. Yeah, so, you know, for me, I don't have a problem. And, you know, again, just to reiterate, as long as we're not doing this word looks like that word and then running with it, I'm good. If we can see these systematic correspondences.
The individual words have its own history. That each individual word, how should I say? Regardless, each individual word would have its own history. Not necessarily that in terms of its formation and its evolution, you know, same through time. And so how there became there in English today, in terms of the location, you know, like over there versus there in terms of the possessive plural there. They evolved separately, you know, into their current hominin state. But you wouldn't say that they, you know, together in the same fashion, you know, saying became words that sounded like they had their each individual history and formations that has to be respected. But in the overall sound inventory, you're looking for that regularity in terms of particular sounds. And so, especially like when we're looking at, for example, in ancient Egyptian, you know, most of the roots in ancient Egyptian are monosyllabic in terms of consonant vowel. And it's a series of prefixes and suffixes to the root that were active and some were not active. And there's a lot of them that are fossilized in that. And so this stuff has to be considered, especially when we're talking about word formation, you know, in Egyptian, especially in early Egyptian. And so we have to treat
just real quick, just to hop back, you know, when we're looking at there, because I think that also came up, we were discussing Grimm's law. So just, you know, something like stop becoming a fricative, right? So this is something, so instead of just looking at this particular word there, that's more like, you know, what philology will look at everywhere the word there occurs and something like that. where a more linguistic, especially dealing with phonetic or phonological thing would be to look at, all right, what's going on with all of the stops in the language, and are all of the stops becoming fricatives, right? So then this is where we're actually doing something beyond, the philological analysis of let's just look at every time this word occurs, the context this word occurs in, the text in which they occur, and so forth and so on, to say, all right, here are all the stops. And we're shifting every single one of these types of stops into become a fricative. All the voiceless stops are going to turn into voiceless fricatives. So if I see a the sound that's a voiceless fricative, then I'm not only going to stop by looking at the word there, I'm going to look at the and where that came from. I'm going to look at the, I'm going to look at the, I'm going to look at all these different things. And then I'll be able to trace it back, not only on its own in that language, but even seeing how it may have changed or stayed the same in a sister language. So when we're talking about, these types of changes in Grimm's law, and that's how the term law is used, is again, not just looking at that single word there and what's going on in that single word there. That's I'm sure people who are philologists love doing that. But where we're actually doing something scientific is seeing how do sounds change normally, and this is very much within the realm of how a sound would change normally, that a voiceless stop becomes a fricative, but not just one single type of stop. So p, v, t, v, k, h, and all these different types of things across across the language. So either pull chains, push chains, anything, a loss of a sound, gaining a new sound, any of those things can, have that type of impact.
Yeah, I mean, I understand completely.
Right. Okay.
Of course, we got the field of etymology,
Mm-hmm.
which again would argue for every word has its own history, and that's what etymology does. It studies the individual history of words, and so it's just different approaches, different aspects of the entire field of linguistics. Again, I don't have a problem in understanding or any of this. I just make a clear demarcation, on certain concepts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my recommendation would be, for us, if we're going to look at historical linguistics or reconstructions or things like that, if we're going into an etymology, this is also the problem with folk etymologies, because when you're looking at something, or just anyone, not you specifically, but someone is just looking at this single word detached from anything else, then that's where you get into, the area of folk etymologies. This person just comes up with a story and then it sounds good. And, that's not so much what historical linguists would do. It would be more so, where can we see these things that are regular? Where can we see things that are systematic, to the point where it couldn't be just by chance that every single one of these types of sounds has changed to every single one of those types of sounds? Whereas that could happen if, I'm doing basically a folk etymological type of write up or proposal. So when we're looking at etymology that's based on historical linguistic analysis, this is how we're able to weed out a real actual etymology where they would put like a little starred form on it, versus a folk etymology where it's like, oh, maybe this, probably that, that type of deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And, Obadele always discusses people who especially do monolanguage etymologizing, and always encourages, of course, the use of other languages in terms of a systematic comparison, so you can get to the true etymology. Again, very familiar with all of that.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I think that gives us a way forward. We have two areas that we've discussed so far. I'm not sure if there's anything else, but we've looked at basically harmonizing, looking at a featural approach of the sounds in contemporary African languages and mapping those to the features, proposed for Medu or understood from Medu, and then also looking at reconstruction based on daughter languages. And again, I think this is where there have been challenges, because was looking at Mboli's work, for example, and in it, the major methodological flaw that I saw is that he has literally Gardner's transcriptions, and he's putting those side by side with contemporary attested African languages. So dealing with a Gardner transcription, which was not derived by, any type of comparative method, and then putting that side by side as a daughter language, with an actual attested language that you can go somewhere and hear somebody say it. That I think basically what the issue is people are trying to get to, this major finding, this major grail without actually doing the intermediate steps of, before we can even use Medu Neter as any type of thing other than a convention that we're all just going to say this is what we're going to do, that we actually have to get to the reconstruction of Medu Neter before we can get to a Negro Egyptian or to anything else. What are your thoughts on that? Your line faded out. Come again, please.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary. For example, I'm gonna hold a book up, Comparative Semitic Linguistics, a manual, Patrick Bennett. And
your video isn't on. I'm not seeing your video, but that's cool. You mentioned the title, so go ahead.
No, I don't have a camera on this computer. I have one of my own. It's not a camera.
That's all good. That's all good. You mentioned you're holding it up, but I was just like, I can't see what you're doing.
So, like on page 13, I think it's on 13. So, for example, because he doesn't strictly use Gardner's transliteration in the text, and there's other considerations that he utilized as well in terms of, for example, the foreign transcription and things of that nature. But in this text, for example, in Comparative Semitic Linguistics, he says, fortunately for our purposes, this lack of, let me go up a little bit. It says the original scripts other than form are generally reliable for representing phonemic consonant constraints, but vowels are often not represented at all. Vowel quality and quantity may be marked with diacritics. Matris, secciones, consonant symbols, conventions for vowel markings, usually the glottal stop with a long A, the semi-vowels Y and W, and long I and long U, respectively. Consonant length may be marked with diacritic like the Arabic, Shadda, or the Hebrew, Dagash. It is never marked in the indigenous Semitic scripts by doubling the consonant symbol. Indication of stress placement is rare. Fortunately, for our purposes, this lack of phonetic detail is not insurmountable, an insuperable problem. Indeed, in some cases, like the retention of archaic consonants of spelling may help us, even without being able to specify the pronunciation of specific consonants. We can determine that it corresponds to the corresponding positions of related words. The reflex of the unit in the proto-language. Reflexes normally retain the features of the earlier unit they reflect. Arabic F, which is a reflex of phonetic P, reconstructed items assume that the proto-language are marked with the asterisk, retains the voiceless labial articulation of P. In some cases, fairly detailed conclusions regarding probable pronunciation. So it's not an insurmountable hurdle that is the particular case. And so certain things bear out as a process of the comparative method itself. And this was done in Semitic. And so it won't be, again, there's no way that you're going to get regardless. Because we also have to keep in mind that Egyptian has a lot of loan words, other Africans. And so they may have had sounds that they couldn't pronounce in the other language, transcribed it in a certain way. So these things have to be considered as well. And so this is why we look at the other languages to see exactly what you said. What are some of the other that would make them pronounce that in a certain way, given their own sound inventory?
Yeah, just real quick, what you're bringing up is actually a difference between a phonetic transcription and just orthography. So like I shared, if you can look at Origine Langue Africaine, so this is Mboli Tableau 6.8.3. And in it, you see him.
What page?
This is page.
I'm trying to open up some other program. I can't open up PNGs.
Page 322. And I'll put a screenshot of it here in the chat itself, so you can get it either way. And what's yeah, so you see these are languages that he's comparing, and he has orthography besides, you know, what looks like something that is IPA. And this is what I was gonna go into. So an IPA, International Phonetic Association transcription, will be different from whatever an orthography, the idiosyncrasies of an orthography may bring up. So for example, in Yoruba, we will write an O with a diacritic mark underneath it, and that's for the sound O. But now, whatever I'm doing, if I'm doing anything that's supposed to be looking at the phonetics or phonological change, I won't keep that orthography. I would actually reflect what's there. But the problem here is, so he's using, this is straight up Gardner transcription, Hanap, right? The aspirated H, you know, and then the I here. And this is problematic for so many reasons. And I think this brother, he's also not a linguist. He has like an engineering background, if I'm not mistaken. But what he's doing is he's putting all of these languages together that have so much temporal depth and diversity side by side, as though they're all attested daughter languages that we would actually use for a comparative reconstruction. So he actually is giving a reconstruction, and the best you could do is just kind of like put that on the side and say, oh, this is how that goes, and these are, you know, probably how those features were in that language. But he's not doing that. He's actually putting a Medu-Neter Gardner transcription that's not reconstructed with a comparative method or whatever. He's putting it side by side with Coptic, and then Sango, Zande, Hausa, Somali, which are contemporary, right? And, you know, I think that this is a major issue, and I'm actually glad it came up, because we'll want to, and this is, or let me say this, I would propose that instead of, especially if we're going with this type of comparative reconstruction route, instead of just assuming that these Gardner transcriptions are accurate or trying to build any type of comparative analysis on those bases in order to get to Negro Egyptian, this intermediate step must be done, where we need to actually reconstruct what the Middle Egyptian is on the basis of the actual attested daughter languages. And, you know, even for some of the ones, I'm not sure, because if he's doing it with Middle Egyptian, he could potentially do it with other languages. But for any of the attested languages, we would need to use a system, which is still convention, but something like an IPA, so we can actually get, this is the sound that we're referring to, and not just this is how somebody sitting somewhere decided based on convention we're going to represent it in writing like this orthographically. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but again, that's not an off sound, and he never argues that it's an off sound. And this, when by the time you get to page 322, you know, he's already gone through a process of seeing what sounds it actually is in ancient Egyptian, which is why we can go back to at least page 260 and see, you know, saying these reconstructions, and what he's actually arguing is the sound for it, and things of this nature. So again, it goes to this issue of science.
Hold on, let me get to 260.
And then there's 268.
So on 260, he again has the conventional Gardner transcription. Yeah. He has the, you know, so basically the point is you can, let me not say you can't, that is very unscientific. So, you know, linguistics is, you know, something that you're actually not just going to be doing arbitrary stuff like this. So it's like he's using an orthographic system in order to come up with a reconstruction. So right here, he's giving you Middle Egyptian, but it's not Middle Egyptian that's reconstructed with the comparative method. It's Middle Egyptian that's just on an arbitrary convention. So he's given the aspirated H, he's given the Qua, he's given Aleph, he's given all of these, you know, orthographic transcriptions, but he hasn't gone through the work of, let me actually reconstruct what the Medu Neter is. Right, so you would need to reconstruct Hausa because you can go and talk to a Hausa speaker and then you can transcribe using IPA exactly what that sound is. You can go to Somali. Oh, go ahead.
Reconstruct is with other languages. So
so now this is what you have to do. You have to go to those other languages and then do the reconstruction of Middle Egyptian. He hasn't done that. He's taken a Gardner orthographic.
But then we would be in a loop again, because you're talking about a reconstruction of Middle Egyptian, and a reconstruction of Middle Egyptian is not an actual attested language.
It's not even supposed to be attested, but Gardner transcriptions aren't attested anything. What you're doing is, so he's trying to get to a reconstruction which isn't attested of Negro Egyptian, right? He's trying to get to a reconstruction of Negro Egyptian, which isn't attested, obviously, using a Gardner transcription, which is also not attested, and putting it on the same plane as Coptic, putting it on the same plane as Sango, putting it on the same plane as Somali, Zande, you understand? So he is trying to get to something that's not attested. Everybody would know it's not attested because as soon as you put that star there, you're saying this isn't attested. But what you have to do, this is, if we're talking about not a loop, we're talking about order of operations. So if you're going to use Middle Egyptian in order to reconstruct Negro Egyptian, the first thing you have to do is not just take what Gardner wrote down as an orthographic convention. You have to actually get to what are the sound values based on the daughter languages. What could possibly those sound values be? But he hasn't done, he just assumed.
Languages of Middle Egyptian.
Did I say again?
What
Can you
are
hear
the
me?
daughter languages of Middle Egyptian that you can do the reconstruction?
You can look at any of the ones that you think have putative cognates, any of the languages that you think have putative cognates, and then you're able to weed out whether they're actual cognates or not using the comparative method, because there's something that you may think is the actual cognate, but it may not be.
Of Middle Egyptian that we would use in the comparison, what are those languages called?
I think the ones that he's chosen, Sango, Zande, Hausa, Somali, I think any of those are valid. You could also use Wolof. You could also use Yoruba. You could also use Akan. You could look at any of these.
Daughter languages of Middle Egyptian.
So what we have to do is, one, the first thing that we have to do is so you're saying that they're not, okay. I'm not sure if you've actually gone through the process of actually weeding those out.
We have to daughter language. So we got to understand what Mboli is doing in this text. He's not assuming, first and foremost, that Negro Egyptian is itself a language family. He's already discussed in the beginning of the text the methodological issues of Obinga 1993 in terms of not using the set group of languages and then examining full paradigms for his reconstruction. Although Obinga did provide some very good initial evidence that, you know, these words that we're comparing and these morphological features are not here by chance, he still didn't go through the process of a full reconstruction. So Mboli doesn't assume that Negro Egyptian exists. He's just starting off with comparing the languages. He just the languages he's chosen.
This is what I'm getting to. He's choosing something that is not reconstructed, a language that is not.
None of the languages are reconstructed in the text. It's no different than for example, your master's thesis. Yoruba is not reconstructed in your
Right.
in your master's thesis, but you're using Yoruba and Akan to do a comparison
Right. In order to do a reconstruction. And I'm saying that that's the same process that he would need to go into, because he has Sango, which isn't reconstructed, Zande, which isn't reconstructed, Hausa, which isn't reconstructed, and Somali, which isn't reconstructed. So he could use those four in order to reconstruct Middle Egyptian, but he doesn't do that, right? He doesn't do that.
How is he going to reconstruct Middle Egyptian without Middle Egyptian in those comparisons?
That makes absolutely no sense.
So
hold on. Let's take it step by step. So one, he doesn't know how to transcribe Middle Egyptian, right? What we're going to do is we think that some of these four actual attested languages may be daughter languages. We're not certain yet, but we think that that may be the case. So now what we need to do is try to find. So he has Sango, Zande, Hausa, and Somali. We're still looking at page 260, right? You see it?
Going back.
Page 260, correspondances des systèmes consonantiques. He has Sango, Zande, Hausa, Somali. I'm fine with all of those.
Okay.
Good. So these are attested languages that are spoken now, right? What's not spoken now is Middle Egyptian. So at this point in time, we don't know what the Middle Egyptian sounds like. What we would do is we would go through a process of looking at sound change in order to perhaps say that, okay, it may have been like a B, or it may have been like a B, because we see Sango, B. We see Zande, B. We Hausa, it has the implosive, but we see Somali, ba. But what he's doing when he's putting the ba under Middle Egyptian is that he has not gone through a process in order to find out what that sound was, which would be the comparative method. He's taken a Gardner transcription in order to write that ba there, right? Now we can come down to, we can look at da on Somali, za and Hausa, za and Zande, za and Sango. And then for Middle Egyptian, he has what is by convention, what Gardner does as ja, which would be the cobra, right? Now he hasn't put a star there to say this is a reconstruction. He hasn't gone through any process in order to find out what Middle Egyptian sounds like, other than going to perhaps Gardner's grammar and saying, oh, he writes it with a D with a line under it. I'm going to write it with a D with a line under it. That's one orthographic. That's not phonetic. And it's an assumption. So he's taking this as just off of an assumption that this is representative of whatever that sound may have been in Middle Egyptian. And I'm saying this is a huge methodological flaw. No linguist would ever do that. Take an orthographic transcription and then put it side by side with the tested language, right? Same thing, we can look at the under Somali, cha under Hausa, ra, zande, ta, sango. And again, he has the Gardner transcription with the line underneath, the ja, which is the cobra. He has the aleph. He has the ka, you know, with the diacritic mark underneath it. And then he shows those. So this is the problem. He doesn't yet even know what Middle Egyptian sounds like, and he's not done the work in order to put anything in that slot yet. He's going to maybe Faulkner, he's going to maybe Gardner, and he's just assuming that I'm just going to put this here.
That's really not
a huge methodological flaw.
That just skips over the first half where he's discussing the issues with the not only the orthography, but with the assumed sound. But again, just like with in the text that I cited, again, you're never going to reconstruct or get those sounds. That's why the process in which we're doing now.
So this is what he's saying, but then he's reconstructing Negro Egyptian on the basis of Gardner's orthography. This is a huge methodological flaw.
If that is the case, then Proto-Semitic doesn't exist. I mean, Proto-Semitic isn't a valid reconstruction either.
So we can look at various things. However,
same thing with Indo-European.
The difference is that if you start off with a table and then you put Indo-European into that table beside modern French, beside English, right? You haven't reconstructed, let's say you haven't even gone through reconstructing anything called Indo-European. You have somebody who was sitting in a room somewhere and said, by convention, I'm going to write this letter D. I haven't reconstructed Indo-European yet. However, I'm just going to write the letter D here.
It's not arbitrary.
And then you're putting it side by side with languages that are spoken synchronically right now. So what he needed to do is first do a reconstruction in order to get to something scientific. There's absolutely nothing scientific about just, let me take Gardner's transcription. It's not based on any type of sound change, not based on any type of sound laws. It's not based on anything. It's that, look, in the dictionary, this is how it's written, so I'm going to write it like this. And then you're putting it side by side with languages that are tested right now where we can go and listen to them and then write the IPA transcription based on what the sound actually is. But did we go and do that for Middle Egyptian? No. We went to the dictionary and we wrote it exactly as we saw it in the dictionary. So there's no IPA here. There are no tones, obviously, but there's no IPA here. There's a convention that was come up with just for the sake of, let's be able to discuss these sounds. So, you know, I looked at the whole thing, but the major problem is the methodology. You're putting non-attested languages side by side with attested languages, and he's doing a reconstruction on that basis. So if you look at page 231, he's given a formula.
He's not comparing reconstruction to, and
really quick, just bear with me, please, just bear with me. Look at page 231.
Okay, I'm there.
The very bottom table. He has formulated, this is his reconstruction. He has the starred form right there, right? Now he's showing you the sound values or orthographic values that he's using to do a reconstruction. And he's basing it on what? Look at the Middle Egyptian table. Look at that transcription. Is that phonetic? No, that's a Gardner transcription. He has gone into doing an entire reconstruction on the basis of nothing phonetic, nothing systematic, nothing other than, look, this is how it's written in a dictionary, Faulkner or Dubuc or whatever. And he puts that side by side with Coptic. And then he puts that side by side with Sango, no regard whatsoever of temporal distance whatsoever. But he's taken the step of, I'm not going to even try to find out what the sound of Middle Egyptian is, because I'm going for the Holy Grail, which is Negro Egyptian. This is a huge, no linguist, no one who has ever studied historical linguistics or comparative linguistics would ever do that. I'm not going to do I'm not going to take the intermediate step to actually find out what Middle Egyptian sounded like. I'm going to take a convention and put it in a table side by side with those that I do know what it sounds like. Do you see how that's a problem?
Yes, and that's going to be a problem regardless with any dead language where we only have the writing. And again, fine,
but before you can get to a Negro Egyptian, you have to go through actually finding out what the Middle Egyptian sounded like on the basis of something scientific, on the basis of how sounds change across sound classes, right? So are these velars that are all changing into palatals, right? Are these labials that are now turning into labial fricatives, right? You have to have some type of something. You can't just grab in the air and say this is in the dictionary and then I'm gonna put it in there.
His comparisons is not done arbitrarily. So when he comes
hold up, the Middle Egyptian writing right there is a convention.
Understood.
Right? So now we have to go beyond the convention to actually get to what the attested sound is.
But he does that throughout the text. He's using the other languages to see what the reflex will more than likely be in Middle Egyptian, given the series of the attested language. It's the same thing which is done in Semitic. One of the things that I quoted. Because you're never, I don't care what
So would you need to reconstruct Semitic before you reconstruct Proto-Semitic? That's my question to you.
Would I need to reconstruct Semitic?
Semitic before you go to Proto-Semitic.
Would I have to?
So look, we're saying that, all right, Semitic at some point in time.
Semitic
here is
a language. You know, we're talking about.
There's not a single language called Semitic. There's a whole group. There's a whole family, a whole phylum.
There's a whole
where this is proposed.
Group of languages that you have no attestation in terms of what they sounded like. You only have the written forms from again, but they include those in the system in terms of the reconstruction of Proto-Semitic and the living languages for which they do have the orthography, you know, that they could put the IPA behind, helps to clarify, you know.
And it's a process. It's a step-by-step process. So we're starting from the known and then going to the unknown. These are the sounds. These are the languages that we know.
That's the issue here. It's not that they just, you know, for example, if that is the case, we could just substitute all the orthographic sounds with numbers and it would still be the same, you know, saying issue there. They're just symbols to represent sounds. And so,
so even let's even come back to methodology. Here, if you look at, where am I now? This is page 229. So here we are, page 229. He has what looks like IPA transcriptions. I don't see anything that looks too non-IPA like under Somali, Hausa, Sande, and Sango. So he has all of those there. And then if we're saying, all right, here's a system, we're going to use a system. Let's say we use IPA for attested languages because we can do that. And then side by side, now we just have Coptic written in Coptic. And then we have Middle Egyptian written based on a Gardner transcription system.
But
it's not even internally consistent.
That wouldn't matter if everyone read the beginning of the book where he gives the IPAs for these sounds. And so if you're confused, you could always go back to that where he's given the description. He gives a sound description of each and every language.
I think we're not necessarily understanding each other.
I understand what you're saying, but that's an issue.
Give it back to me. Give it back to me. What the point that I'm making in terms of order of operations?
You're saying that he's not using the IPA sounds to compare with the other IPA sounds for the other languages. He's just
not only that, but he hasn't done a reconstruction for Middle Egyptian.
I understand.
And I'm saying that is an incorrect and it's not a very good order of operations. So you're going to.
I don't see a reconstruction of Yoruba in your work or Akan.
How would I reconstruct Yoruba and it's spoken right now? How does that make any sense to you?
Because that's my point.
It's spoken right now. And what I did is I use IPA because Yoruba has its own orthographic system.
It's a convention for sounds. These are all symbols. That's the whole point of writing. They're just symbols to represent sounds. We understand that. The issue is that it's not attested in terms of a living.
So this is what I'm hearing as a lack of understanding. What you just said, you said I didn't reconstruct Yoruba. I wouldn't need to reconstruct Yoruba. I wouldn't need to reconstruct Akan. He doesn't need to reconstruct Somali. He also doesn't need to reconstruct Hausa. But what he does need to reconstruct is the one that I'm saying that he did not reconstruct.
Here's the question.
Please, just hold on 1 second because.
I understand. Believe me, I understand what you're saying. I'm asking you this.
Then let me make this last point, please. Just let me make this last point. So you're saying that I didn't reconstruct a language that is attested right now. You don't reconstruct languages that are attested right now. You write them down. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying he would need to reconstruct Somali because it's spoken. I'm not saying he should reconstruct Hausa because it's spoken. He can just write it down. What he would need to reconstruct is the one that he did not reconstruct, which is Middle Egyptian, because it's not spoken. So he needs to go and do that reconstruction on the basis of what he is saying are putative daughter languages. But he doesn't do that. He just puts it in the table side by side. And it's not just a question of how is he representing the sounds. I'm fine with that. It's the problem of he's assuming that these types of conventions are on the same level temporally as attested languages?
Okay, so now my question is,
go ahead.
can you name me the linguist who reconstructed any dead language before coming to the proper IPA for that language? Since no linguist would do this, I'm trying to figure out so I can see the proper examples.
So if you look at Guthrie, if you look at Coele, we can go all the way back to Coele's word list, which is what a lot of people use early on to do these reconstructions. If you look at Guthrie, trying to get to Proto-Bantu, what he does.
That's not my question. My question is for the languages that we only have attested in writing. We're not talking about, languages that don't have writing, like Bantu. We're talking about like Ugaritic, like ancient Greek, like Middle Egyptian and Hebrew, and the early South Arabian, and these scripts and things of this nature. For example, Sumerian, where you never deal with the script. You wouldn't even deal with the script. You put the script to the side. The script has nothing to do with it. You're dealing with sound. You can only ascertain what the sound is by examining the script. So what I'm saying is... No, that's not the case. That's the reason why we do reconstruction. Listen to what I'm saying. You didn't have access to the sounds or the language because there is no living language, there's no living version of this. You only have what is written. So what I'm saying is for those languages that you only have what is written that is attested, for which you don't have a modern version, of it, for example, like Sumerian, tell me, what are those linguists who reconstructed first before arguing that these sounds exist in this language? Very good. So we're not even looking at the writing system of Middle Nature. What we're looking at is Sango, a putative daughter language. We don't know yet. My question, I understand you're trying to circumvent my question. I'm asking specifically in terms of the Middle East. I answer your question. We're looking at the writing system of Middle Egyptian. I'm saying you wouldn't even look at the writing system. You put the writing system off somewhere. You don't deal with the writing system because we don't know what those sounds are. What you do is you look at putative daughter languages. We don't look at how things are written. We don't look at orthography. We don't look at any of those things. Here is Middle Egyptian as it's written. We don't look at any of those. You look at sound changes. You get some putative daughter languages together, such as Sango, Zande, Hausa, and Somali. And then based on those, you say, how could a sound have changed in order to become this in this language, and that in that language, and way that over there in that language, and that in that language. And then from that, then you reconstruct something. And then after you've done the reconstruction, now you can go back and say, oh, this is how they chose to write that sound that I've reconstructed with this starred form. So we don't know what Middle Egyptian looks like, and we're not going to put an orthography side by side with a sound. We don't know what it sounds like until we do a reconstruction. That's the whole point of comparative linguistics. That's the whole point of comparative historical linguistics, is in order to find out what that sound was. And do you know how we do this? Through regular sound changes. How do sounds change? How do human sounds change? What's attested in the languages throughout the world typologically, right? Is a bug going to turn into a no, we don't see that, right? It may turn to a pa because it's at the same place of articulation. It may turn into a fa, it may turn into a va. So in certain languages, you see a ba, like Ba Congo. In other languages, you see a wa, as in Wa Swahili. There's something going on there, right? So all of these are labials, right? This one is a semi-vowel here. On this one, we have a voice stop. How are sounds going to change? Now, if I'm thinking, okay, most likely whatever the proto-language that both of those came from, most likely it had something featural to do with lips, right? I don't know how it sounded, but it had something to do with lips. Now, I don't look at any writing system. I don't look at anything orthographic. I'm looking at what are the sounds and how do sounds change,
right? Is a buh more likely to change into a wah? Is a wah more likely going to change into a buh? And then I come up with my starred form based on what I know happens in human languages. Now, if I have a buh here and a wah here, and I reconstruct a with no lip, with pharyngeal fricative or something like this, people be like, this guy's crazy, right? How is that sound going to change into a buh and a wah here? It doesn't make any sense. So this is what you do. You don't look at the writing system. You come up with, all right, this is the most logical possibility on the basis of what we know of human sounds and how they change regularly across sound classes. That's not what he's doing here. He puts a written thing with a written convention side by side with attested languages.
Again,
you don't look at the writing system. You don't look at meta writing.
Question. It was a direct question. It was specific.
And I directly said, don't look at the writing system. If you look at,
I'm saying, listen.
Okay, don't look at the writing system. That's my direct answer.
Listen to me at the same time.
Okay.
If I'm asking, as it regards to those dead languages, who has done that method to ascertain the phonetics of these dead languages? So I can study their works, because obviously you haven't done this with Middle Egyptian. So I can't go to you and to see how you did it. So for all those,
the point of this group, because that was not done. And Mboli certainly didn't do it. That's the whole point.
That's not my question. I'm assuming that for the sake of argument, you're right.
Okay.
Okay. So, but you're saying you're right because this is what linguists have done, and these are the proper results.
Look at Guthrie.
Languages. So
look at anyone who puts a star. Look at anyone who puts a star by their reconstruction. I mentioned Guthrie. He puts a star there. That's what the star means. Look at Loprieno. Look at Loprieno.
Loprieno doesn't have a text where he even reconstructed any of these terms. He just comes up with reconstruction. He does not have a text of his where he actually does a comparative method. The James P. Allen has a text where he's doing reconstructions for Egyptian. You also have the text.
So look at page 71 of Loprieno right now. When he puts the stars there, what are those stars there for? Page 71 under numerals. What are those stars there for?
My question is, what is the...
Please go to Loprieno right now. Go to Loprieno right now, ancient Egyptian. Hold on. Page 71. And look at those stars there. What do those stars mean?
I understand what the stars mean. That's not my question. My question
that is to say this is a reconstruction.
That's elementary. My question is, where is his work where he did the reconstructions? All he has is he's citing the reconstructions. It's just like Christopher Ehret. Christopher Ehret has works where he'll cite his reconstructions, but he won't show you how he came to the reconstructions. You have to go through many, many, many different works to finally find out where it is that he did the reconstructions. In this text, in Loprieno's 95 Ancient Egyptian and Linguistic Introduction, he has a whole bunch of reconstructions here, but no comparative analysis anywhere.
So you're looking for like a textbook that shows how to do reconstructions. Look at Hans Henrik Hall, Principles of Historical Linguistics.
For how to do reconstructions, I'm talking about the text that actually did the reconstructions for dead languages for which we only have attested the writing.
So, okay.
Who was those?
So first off, what we have attested is not the writing. The whole point of this group is to look at what the daughter languages are. And these are putative until they're substantiated.
I understand what you're saying. Reconstruct, the languages you think are daughter languages for some proto-language and use those reconstructions, in your analysis.
No, these aren't reconstructions. These are attestations.
No, if you're
that's the difference.
You're reconstructing the sounds to see how these sounds have changed over time, and to use.
No. You're going in the opposite direction. You start off with what is attested in the daughter languages right now.
But listen, there's
we know of how sounds change.
Languages. In order to say daughter languages, you have to have a parent. You're assuming that these are related already, and that they have a proto-language for which they belong and which has been reconstructed. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is that the languages in which you choose to compare, you're reconstructing from there, and then seeing how the sounds have changed and what more than likely is the orthographic, for example, for Middle Egyptian, for these sounds that we can attest to these living languages and in their evolutions over time and things of this nature. I understand what you're saying as far as that. That's not my question. My question directly is simply, who are the researchers that did this method and applied it to other languages, not simply Middle Egyptian, but other languages that are in the same boat as Middle Egyptian?
So what boat is that?
Where we only have attested the writing system, and they have an orthography for the sounds that may not be representative of the actual phonemes of the language. For example, ancient Hebrew, Sumerian, South Arabian, those types of languages. So the method in which you're attaining.
So hold on. Hans Henrik Hawk, I just opened this up, Principles of Historical Linguistics. Now, let me come to the heart of what this is. What the boat that you're saying Middle Egyptian is in, I don't think it's in that boat, because there are daughter languages that are there.
Not Middle Egyptian. No.
Yes.
So
yes.
That's what I asked you before. So what are the daughter languages of Middle Egyptian?
And then I answered you before. I said the ones that he chose are fine. He has Sango.
Daughter languages of Middle
He has Zande. He thinks that they're on the same level, but no. So this is exactly.
They're not a daughter. That's my point. In order to say a daughter language, you would have to know what the parent language is. So to say that Zande and Somali are daughters of Middle Egyptian is to assume that Middle Egyptian is the parent of them all. So I'm not talking. That's not the case.
And you can start with that assumption, and then you go on to substantiate it. What he's doing, he's dealing with these as though they're all lateral synchronic languages, and that's incorrect. He's dealing with these as though these are all lateral, attested right now synchronic languages, and that is incorrect.
He already says this in the beginning in terms of the temporal difference. Matter of fact,
he says it, but then he goes through making reconstructions with Middle Egyptian as a daughter language of Negro Egyptian. Do you see why that's a problem? I don't know if you see why that's a problem, but it's a huge problem.
It's not a problem, because that's, again, I don't know why you're trying to avoid my question.
I answered your question multiple times because I said Middle Egyptian isn't in that boat. You go to any. No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. You said all we have is the daughter languages. This is why.
All we have is the daughter languages. I'm saying that as far as Middle Egyptian is concerned, you don't have a living language which you can argue is the daughter of Middle Egyptian or daughters of Middle Egyptian. All we have is the writings of the Middle Egyptians, and we have a convention in terms of what the phonetics might be. There are several languages and several scripts that are in the same boat. And so in terms of, but they use these languages in the reconstruction process of these language families. So I'm asking you, who are the linguists or the group of linguists in terms of a linguistic team, and what are
so you're starting off with a false premise, which is all we have is a writing system. There are plenty of daughter languages, and that's when we look at origin, commune. Then you also look at what Mboli is doing right now. This is the false premise.
You're just talking about a hypothetical parent for which Somali, Zande, or could be daughter languages, which Middle Egyptian could be a daughter language. Now if you want to argue that Middle Egyptian, that's the argument from Homburger from early back in the day, that a lot of these African languages are daughter languages of Middle Egyptian and things of this nature. And that was a hypothesis that has demonstrated to be false, over time. That's not the question here. I'm asking specifically who has done that work, that they have the manual.
Yeah, I just gave you a manual. Look at Hans Henrik Hawk, Principles of Historical Linguistics.
I have this in my hand, second edition, revised and updated.
Very good. That's the exact same one that I'm looking at. So when you read through that manual, that will tell you exactly how reconstructions are done on the basis of daughter languages. What we have here is we have plenty of daughter languages, but I'll say this, putative daughter languages. So how we substantiate that these are actually daughter languages? Through systematic and recurrent sound change. So we could see how in this attested language, here we have Zande, for example. You have Sango, for example. You have Hausa, for example. We have all of these different attested languages. And then we don't know anything about what the Middle Egyptian sounds like. We don't know. There's conventions, there are guesses, but we don't know that yet. All we have is these daughter languages, right? So now what we're going to do is do a reconstruction of Middle Egyptian in order to come to what those sounds most likely were. And I'm saying that that's also what you have to do before you can do a reconstruction of Negro Egyptian. You have to do that reconstruction of Middle Egyptian before you can do a reconstruction of Negro Egyptian. And it seems like you don't understand that. He also, Mboli also did not understand that, which is why he didn't even go through trying to do a reconstruction of Middle Egyptian. He thought that just getting it right out of the dictionary is cool, but it's not cool. Before we can take Middle Egyptian to do a reconstruction on the basis of Middle Egyptian of something else, in this case, Negro Egyptian, the first thing we have to do is come up with something scientific on the basis of regular and recurrent sound changes in order to get us to what are those sounds of Middle Egyptian. And the way to do that is what he just tried to do in his text, where he put Sango, Zande, Hausa, Somali, he put all these languages together in order to come up with, for him, this is now Negro Egyptian. But he skipped a step, which is a very important step. What does Middle Egyptian sound like? We don't know yet. Let's do that reconstruction first, as opposed to let's look in the dictionary and assume that that convention is something, and then hop off of that and then go into Negro Egyptian. It's order of operation. You have to reconstruct Middle Egyptian, which is what we are convening as a group to do. You have to reconstruct Middle Egyptian. And then from there, after that, that's where you can now reconstruct Negro Egyptian. He wants to deal with Middle Egyptian as though it's the same thing on the same level as Somali, as though Middle Egyptian is attested right now. And it's not attested. We have to go in through a scientific process of how sounds change, find out how Middle Egyptian sounded like, and that's what we are here to do. Now the handbook, Hans Henrik Hawke, goes through, he shows you lots of languages that are reconstructed on the basis of daughter languages, where he has Old High German, where they have written things. We don't know what Old High German sounds like, but we know what the daughter languages sound like, and that's why we put that little star there to say, I think that this is what Old High German sounded like. All we have is these written documents, right? And now on the basis of what the daughter languages are doing, that's how we're now going to put that little star that says is not attested. We don't know that that's exactly what it sounded like, but based on how we know human languages change, most likely this is what it sounded like. Now we can use Old High German to get to an earlier stage of the language, going all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. But imagine I put Old High German in a chart side by side with French that's spoken right now. Old High German, nobody knows what it sounded like. All we have is written documents, and I'm gonna put it in a chart side by side with modern French and American modern English and whatever else, put it in with Dutch, modern Greek. I'm gonna put all those in a chart side by side without finding out what Old High German sounded like first. And now I'm gonna go and reconstruct Proto-Indo-European. Now I'll put it back to you. I want you to show me any linguist who has done that, put Old High German in a chart side by side with modern English in order to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European without finding out what Old High German sounded like first, through any comparative method. Name me that one.
I would first of all like my question answered, and we got to remember that Hawk is, this text is not a text on how to do comparative reconstruction.
It's to show you what the principles are.
Historical. It doesn't teach.
It's showing you the principles, but it shows you very clearly methods of doing it.
Not a step-by-step on how to do the comparative reconstruction.
So look at page 41 of High. He has Old English, he has Old High German, he has Sanskrit written there.
Okay. So I could actually.
And then,
I have no.
and then on page 39,
Hold
he's
on.
giving you the Proto-Indo-European. And he has the star form there.
Let me see. I'm gonna have to show you. Hold on one sec. When I make these arguments, I have no problems showing you an example in the text of what it is. So, hold on. Hang on, I need to, let me see if I can find bring my other camera so you can see the text.
No problem.
See if I can plug this in. Let me go. I gotta go to the living room.
No problem. I'm here.
Hopefully this will work. So it's saying it's not recognized. Hold on. Can you see me? I can't see me. It's not on.
No, I can't.
I don't know what's going on. Let's see. It's the right camera. It's not. I'll just take a screenshot or a picture of it.
Okay, no problem. So while you get that, let's try to, I think, come to some level of conclusion. It seems like in principle, we would like to use the comparative method. And I would definitely agree with using the comparative method. Along with that, I think that what we're looking at doing is a reconstruction of Middle Egyptian, and then possibilities of how to do that. So let's, I don't know if you're available next week, but let's try to reconvene and come up with a work plan. That was something that I wanted to try to get done, but of course, we've gone into other topics. Let's try to come up with a work plan of how we can use the comparative method and looking at regular sound change across sound classes in order to come up with what Middle Egyptian may have sounded like on the basis of the daughter languages, putative daughter languages that then we will substantiate or put out as either they are daughter languages or are not. I think your mic is on mute. Are you still there? I'm gonna type to you in the chat if you're still there. The mic is on mute.
Testing.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I think when I plugged in the webcam, it has a mic on it too, so it switched.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But it's not working. So anyway, I heard everything you said.
Okay.
Yes.
So if what's your availability next week?
I mean, I work Sundays again. I mean, I'm off every Saturday. So
Okay.
If this was, you know, this time was good for you next Saturday, that's fine with me too.
It may need to be a little bit earlier. Here in Ghana, they're having a Black Star Festival, and I'm not sure when we're going to head out to that.
All right, no problem. Even if it's
what's the earliest time that would work for you on a Saturday?
Whatever time it is, I'll be there. I'll be up. So let's
Okay.
say, would you want to do it 2 hours earlier, 8 o'clock a.m. my time, or even earlier? I wake up at 5:30 every morning. So
Okay, let's do it then. Well, let's make it 6. Let's make it 6 so you can get freshened up and chill out for a second.
no problem. So 6
Okay, cool.
Saturday.
And that'll be 10 my time.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, but I think this is a very good discussion just so we can see, where we're going. But I think that's, again, and this will be my last thing on this point. I think that's the major failing, is that we have to reconstruct Middle Egyptian before we can now use Middle Egyptian to reconstruct something else. We can't just look at the dictionary. So, if we could, then what our job is in this group is already done. We'll just take out the dictionary, use Gardner's writing system and say, this is it. And then just go with the conventions as we're teaching Middle Egyptian. This is E, so forth and so on. But in my view, because that work hasn't been done and we're just going on this type of convention, there are those who have done some type of Egyptian phonology, other works that are out there. But I think what we need to be doing is, instead of looking at these Eurasian languages, let's look at the African languages, and then from there, then we can start making some progress. Again, I think it's fundamental that we can't just look at Gardner or Faulkner transcription and say, well, that's how it sounded like. We got to do some kind of reconstruction if we're going to go the reconstruction route whatsoever.
All
right. I don't know if you had any last points that you wanted to make.
No. We'll chop it up again next week. And so yeah, I have nothing to say at this point.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so, and what I'll also do, I mentioned also resources. So what I'll try to do is, there are a couple articles by Prof. Fry where he goes into these macro language groupings of mutual intelligibility, and just looking at, all right, basically a featural approach to an entire phonetic inventory and some type of mapping in order to say, all right, basically what they do now. So they have a convention for English, but we can say, all right, we can look at the entire Mende grouping and say, this is the conventional pronunciation for Mende. And it's based on the actual phonetic inventory of Mende. Looking at what are the labials in Mende, what are the velars in Mende, what are the palatals in Mende, and then try to match those with some type of feature approach based on, looking at how we're going to do a mapping to Middle Egyptian. So basically, I'll just make that resource available so we can see what those language families are, and then decide, is that something that's workable or not. I'm not wedded to it. We could throw it out, but just to put something on the table.
No problem.
No problem. All right, and I'll share this with the discussion with Brother Ben Levy, and I think it's Tonjedi. I think he's also in the group, so just so they can get caught up. Because I think it's a very fruitful discussion so that we can all get on the same page ultimately.
No problem.
No problem.
Indeed.
All right, brothers. So we'll continue next week, and I'll give you a set time once I know when we're going to head out for the day next Saturday.
All righty. Cool.
All right.
All righty.
All right. All right. Appreciate it. Peace.